honestly, the import thing was so fucking triggering for me because my parents literally did buy a larder in the 80s, a yellow larder station wagon.
I won't name and shame, but when we went through that episode, there were at least a couple of people who were like, what's a larder?
Really?
Yeah. So there are entire generations of
Would have
adult
no
New Zealanders
idea.
who don't have any of those larder
Yeah.
vestigial traumas.
Yeah, good for them. I love that. That's about making change for future generations.
Yes.
That's the decent society.
Yeah,
It is.
that's
What
the
we've been talking
decent
about.
society.
That's positive action.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good times, good times. Kia ora tātou, this is Gone By Lunchtime, a podcast about politics in New Zealand. My name is Toby Manhire, and today with me, Annabelle Mather. Kia ora, how are you?
Kia ora. I am very well.
Lovely to see you, and also to see you, Ben Thomas. How are you going?
Not doing so well.
Oh.
After a few days of sunshine down in the wind chillest little capital in Wellington, it's back to bleak, gusting, battering winds and grey skies. And I realised this government doesn't have a recession problem or an economic recovery problem. It's got a goddamn sunshine problem. During the days that the sun was on my face, I was like, what recession? Who needs money when we have the fresh air and the warmth on my face and the temporary alleviation of seasonal affective disorder, which has been symptomatic for the last 10 months in this hellhole. And
That's not hay fever, it's green shoots.
If the country actually had any electricity, we could just get everyone a sad light lamp, and I think the government's troubles would be over.
Genius. Hey, speaking of Wellington, can I wish my daughter Omiha Pearl a happy 26th birthday today? Hari huri tau Omiha Pearly girls. She lives in Wellington.
Right.
She too is, I like to think that she's miserable in Wellington, but she actually
Greatest
really
city
likes
in the world.
it.
Wearing a Hurricanes jersey today, actually, is Te Butler.
Greatest rugby team in the world.
Greatest rugby team in the world, without question. And keeping us company as well, curled up in the corner, Shiloh the dog. Hey, Shiloh. We're going to talk about some other exciting and thrilling things today. If you thought, people often say to me, is there anything more exciting and thrilling, dynamic, sexy even, than local government reform? And I say to them, well, I think so. I think we can make this more thrilling, sexy, glamorous by adding in resource management reform into the mix. You know, you didn't think you could make that cocktail more exciting, but yes, we can. Yes, we can. And so we had revealed yesterday, and I'm speaking to you today on the morning of Wednesday, November the 26th. Yesterday we had the announcement of what was trailed as the biggest reform to local government since 1989, which is when the Michael Bassett reforms crunched down the local authorities dramatically at the tail end of the fourth Labour government. And this time, though, it's being done in the service of resource management. Resource management is like the biggest, gnarliest, most gruesome beast in New Zealand politics, maybe just in New Zealand entirely, that just masticates everything in front of it and spits it out. It is, it is beyond any particular violation. And its latest victim is local body politics. It's going to eat up, chew up, and spit out the entirety of in its own service. You cannot fix RMA, it turns out, until you fix local body politics. And so the plans that were announced, and it was interesting, they were announced by Chris Bishop with Simon Watts as his sort of sidekick along. Simon Watts is the local government minister. Chris Bishop is the RMA reform minister. Is that what his role is in this?
Yes.
Anyway, to give you as best I can a summary of what it involves. It involves obliterating all the regional councillors while keeping the sort of shells, the structures of those regional councils, the scaffolds of them, and they would instead become not regional councils but combined territories boards or CTBs, if you like. And those would be governed by this, guardians of the galaxy of mayors.
Overlords.
Yeah. So all the mayors, on top of their day jobs, their existing jobs, the mayors of the cities and the district councils would become these of the Avengers.
Or would it be more like, on Star Wars, like the prequels, where they have those big meetings of all the rangatira and some look like robots and some have 5 heads?
Yes, exactly like that.
Some are wearing robes,
Exactly
some
like
wear
that.
nothing. Yeah.
Is that the
That's
Star
how
Chamber
I
or is
see
that
it.
something else?
Something like that. I
It
can't
would be
remember the
exactly
technical
like that.
term. It's not CTB, but it's something similar.
Yeah, the ones where you're kind of like in the background, you can see the animals that were designed. Someone sketched them and brought them to a meeting as an that can go in the back row. We've got to let Steve have his thing in there. His mutant animal just hovers in the back row.
Yeah.
But that is not being sold as a toy. I'm sorry, that is not going on Christmas stockings. So there'll be some of those. Those will be the mayors from the really small. So they'll have to sit. They'll structure these CTBs in such a way as because you get more votes if you are mayor of more people, and so the super mayors, the big, the Andrew Littles of the world, will be sat right in the middle,
right at the table, not in the second row.
Exactly, and then right out the back, the ones of the tiniest districts, which I shan't name, will be like those little made-up creatures from the back of the Phantom Menace. And what will they do? Well, they will run the regional council stuff as it applies, which includes all of the resource approval territory, including transport in many cases. And they would be
resource management for certain things, like the environmental stuff, like air quality, water takes, things like that. Not for building your deck or something. That's local authorities.
And they will also be tasked with coming up with something called a regional reorganisation plan to look at how the council system in their pocket of New Zealand, their 1/11th, would be reorganised. They're basically being nudged to go ahead and amalgamate and to create unitary councils in the form that you have in Auckland, really. So it's basically a nudging along the track to do that. Bishop acknowledged as much yesterday. In New Zealand you have all this absolute mishmash of councils, from district councils, regional councils, city councils, and then unitary councils, which Auckland is the biggest one, but there are also a few others like Nelson or Gisborne, for example. It's an interesting one, Ben. The National Party rhetoric is to do with devolution, and in this case, the local government minister gets a sign-off on all of these plans as they come in and can veto them and replace them if they choose to. It doesn't go as far as the Ben Thomas solution, which is to absolutely destroy all local government once and forever. But it does seem to be, in a sense, a move towards a centralisation rather than a decentralisation. Tell me if I'm wrong. What do you see when you look at this exciting new Star Chamber?
A big part of the governing party's campaigns in 2023 was the Three Waters proposal or actually the legislation that had been passed by the previous government to deal with water services, which took these assets legally away from the councils, put them into these new bodies that would be run at a very large regional level with council input, with some iwi input, and there were two things that really kind of raised the hackles of local government in that case. One was the involvement of any Māori doing anything, and the second was this idea that you were taking away local control and you were forcing people into regionalism. National, in particular, as you noted, talked about devolution, localism, returning community control, and in their water reforms, we've seen the same kind of thing where they've been saying, look, you've got total control over your destinies. You can do whatever you like. Not that. Not that. You can come up with a plan, not that one. And we just want to see what you've proposed. No, not that.
Yeah.
No. And so it's very much sort of it's kind of what's the word for the positive parenting, where you give the kid, you lay out 2 pairs of shoes for the kid and let them choose, and it's basically
trick them into thinking they've got agency.
Essentially, that's it. It's basically leading the councils through this tough journey of acceptance that they have to die. And basically the government is involved in shepherding the councils through the stages of grief towards the inevitable, which is amalgamation, which is absolutely necessary. We have these tiny little councils, that have sort of 13,000, 8,000 ratepayers and 20,000 residents, and they can't, foot infrastructure bills. There's huge capacity issues, in terms of the expertise that's available to them. Thomas Coughlan wrote a good column analysing this, where he said, they're not really actually getting rid of regional councils. What they're doing is sucking local councils into regional councils. The regional councils will really be the things that survive in the long term. And of course, we know that this is a consultation. The government's very open to suggestions on it and input. Yes. Not that, but it will be. And so. So this is a very directed devolution and localism, in the sense that I guess they're just doing door knocks to tell them the bad news.
I think top marks to the government for coming up with new and creative ways to breach treaty settlements. There are a lot of iwi whose settlements are linked to relationships with regional councils, and where regional councils help give effect to the terms of their treaty settlements. So that's going to cause a big bung fight, no doubt. I heard Nicola Willis and Carmel Sepuloni on the radio today, and Carmel said, of all the things that people are worried about, including cost of living, this is what the government's come up with. And Nicola Willis said that in part this was in response to the cost of living crisis, because this was going to create efficacy that would flow down to ratepayers. And I think all of us who live in Auckland Super City can all agree that it's so much cheaper to live here now as a result of the Super City. In all seriousness, I think it's really concerning that we're seeing such a huge concentration of power into one minister. From the right, who talk all the time about big government, like there's no bigger government than these kind of moves. In terms of the Star Chamber, to even be elected as a mayor takes a certain amount of resource, which puts it out of the reach of ordinary councillors. And so again, that becomes, that really limits the pool of representation and who's able to represent their region. So just problems everywhere with this, and not what anybody is asking for. And regionalism means regionalism. If we want better services in our community, more efficiency, quicker responses, and all of that, we should actually be going back to like the days of county councils. Not this. This does not do anything. It just makes it worse, particularly as we, as our regions become more and more affected by climate change.
Isn't it a kind of indictment on governments of both stripes, going back for many years, all the way to 1989, if you like, that there have been numerous concerns raised about the local government system not being fit for purpose. And every time the local elections roll around, you hear the same appalling statistics trotted out. Like, for example, essentially for every position in local government that's up for grabs, on average, there are 1.8 candidates, which means that across the board in local elections, you are more likely to be elected than not, which in itself does not make for a thriving, functional democracy, in my view. And there was a report done just a couple of years ago, which went in the filing cabinet. There have been numerous different inquiries into how to reform local government. There are the Justice select committee does an inquiry after every local body elections and makes various recommendations, which almost uniformly are ignored. And now it's kind of, actually, turns out one of the reasons that our resource, one of the key reasons, perhaps the fundamental reason why our resource management system is balked, is because our local government system doesn't work, is not fit for purpose. And isn't it an indictment, Ben, on governments for not having tackled the structural failure earlier on, such that it could be designed in a way that isn't subordinate to the Resource Management Act reforms?
I mean, I think the two things go hand in glove if what you're talking about is development, about getting rid of red tape, getting rid of over-bureaucratization. One of the few things that wasn't covered in either Juggernaut Series 1 or 2, which otherwise were fantastic podcasts.
Oh, shots fired.
Good to have some
Shots
feedback,
fired.
wasn't it?
Jeez. Yeah.
Was that the Resource Management Act, which I think was drafted by Geoffrey Palmer and then passed by the national government with Simon Upton, it was intended to move away from prescriptive red tape bureaucratization in councils and move towards this kind of nimble effects-based management where you were really just looking at, the impacts of any development or actions on the environment rather than these long lists of codifications and rules. And anyone who's looked at a local or district plan prepared under the RMA will see that that's not how it turned out, because the RMA was delivered by councils, and because it was sort of more open-ended and effects-based, there was a lot of latitude for councils that were still stacked full of these old school town planners, and they just interpreted it in that way. And so it's just incredible, huge volumes of sorts of things. What's one of the reasons people don't get involved in local government and participatory democracy in local government? The long-term plan of a council is 8,000 pages long or something, right? No single person has read the whole thing. And these RMA reforms, what are they going to be? The Planning Act and the Natural Environment Act are an attempt basically to do what the first RMA was intended to do, which is return it to sort of the baseline is that you can do stuff unless there's a kind of clear expectation for an environmental standard that you can't do it or a reason, that it impinges on somebody else's property. And look, it will fail to do that. It will fail to reach that goal, but hope, the idea is that it will at least move it a little further along the line. Circling elliptically back around, the issue with development and growth is not so, it's a function of the history of these institutions, but it's not really the structure of local government itself. It's the regulation. And if the problem is the structure of local government, the regional councils and all the planners and all of the people who have been administering the system over the time will still be there. They will just have a territorial management committee or whatever, composed of mayors. And, one of the big arguments against local government that I make a lot of the time when I'm asking people to abolish it and establish the Department of Parks and Sewage is the governance problem, right? The high-level oversight of these bureaucrats is meant to be done by the elected officials on behalf of ratepayers, and residents. There are over 1,000 elected members, right? So only 1,800 candidates by that ratio of who stands, but 1,000 elected members, right? Once you get to the 121st best MP in New Zealand's parliament, you're not looking at top caliber people. And so when you have 1,000 people elected and, over 100 of those are regional councillors, you're not getting great governance. You can't expect that you'll be getting great governance. And, will that be improved by putting all of the mayors on a committee? Well, mayors do tend to be more accountable than other councillors. They tend to be higher profile. Certainly didn't seem to help water services over the last 100 years, having mayors, sort of exercise responsibility.
There was quite a funny moment on Checkpoint last night when Simon Watts said, well, one of the arguments of having the mayors is that they're people that, people tend to more know who they are. They've got more people know who they're voting for. He said, do you think with respect that people know who the local government minister is?
That's very, very unkind. But look, in some cases, having the mayors on there will be great. I remember when I was on the Wayne Brown campaign in 2022, he was talking about when he was successfully won re-election as Far North District Council mayor, in the 2010s. And he said, this guy was standing against me, some guy who mostly lived in Auckland. And he said, Wayne Brown, he's only in the office 3 days a week. I'm not going to be a part-time mayor. I'm going to be a full-time mayor. So I went on the radio the next day and said, if he can't do it in 3 days, he must not be very bloody good because it's not a big job. So Wayne could probably knock off Auckland mayor, new regional council chair. He'd still have like sort of Saturday, Sunday and off.
Well, he's in the mode lately. We'll come back to that perhaps of advising all the central politicians that they should be doing exactly as he does. Ben,
But yeah, look, I mean, a lot of mayors do find it a full-time job, and adding this layer doesn't, to me, suggest that you'll have much better oversight than you have now of that institutional machinery.
I mean, I don't think that mayors are necessarily better qualified than other councillors or are the top of the 1,000 to represent their regions. And I think you can look at some of the mayors that we've had recently that prove that that they're not great operators or particularly great at governance. And the other thing that we need to remember is that New Zealand is quite a big spread country with like small population bases sort of peppered around, and you need to have people that are close to the resources, that are close to the communities in order to manage them appropriately, and this does the opposite of that. And we often hear that people extolling the virtues of a Western liberal democracy, but this seems very anti-democratic to me, not more democratic. This is not, as Ben said before, this isn't about devolving more power and regionalism and all of that sort of stuff. It's less of it. So, I can't imagine it's going to be super popular with voters.
I believe that consultation is open till February, I think. If you want to get involved, and there's more to come in terms of the RMA reform in a couple of weeks, I believe, as well as suggestions that there may be some other legislation relating to caps on rates. So, the bulldozer continues down the path. Speaking of Wayne Brown.
I mean, I think that a better solution would be Ben's. If we're going to do this, we might as well just go straight to, what is it?
Recreation and sewage. Was it recreation and sewage? No, playgrounds and sewage.
Parks and sewage.
Parks and sewage. Yeah, okay.
And probably libraries as well, because I wouldn't trust them to MCH.
All right,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah. But look, obviously my idea is right, and more opinion has been swinging that way over time. But at the same time, abolishing 10% of the councillors in New Zealand, it's not a bad start.
Thank you, all councillors, for your work. It's pretty. You got to have some sympathy for these people who were elected sort of 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And then they get told, "Oh yeah, you guys, we're just clearing that out. No, we're going to need these rooms for something else." Wayne Brown,
Tony Soprano. Don't you feel like you wanted to be in there at the beginning of something rather than the end?
Wayne Brown has, in some ways, been involved in the many firings of the starting gun for election 2026. Are you feeling the excitement, Annabelle? I mention Wayne Brown because he's offering advice to the politicians on how to be more like him, which on one level is is quite Wayne Brown. On another level, I mean, look at the evidence. I don't know whether it's him or Chris Martin, but Luxon is trying out fixing the basics, building the future. That was a clear tryout, as Laurie Smith wrote in her piece for the Spinoff on Monday at his 2 years in speech, in which he announced the KiwiSaver policy on Sunday. Also, perhaps less celebrated, but I think notable, is David Seymour has just embarked on a Fixing What Matters tour. He's going to fix what matters. So there's a lot of fixing. Did you come up with that slogan for Wayne Brown in that campaign, Ben?
Which one? Oh, no, that was already...
Okay.
No. I think didn't Bob the Builder come up with that? The fix.
Can we fix it? Can we fix it?
Can
Yes,
we
we
fix
can.
it? Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. Bob the Builder, Wayne Brown and Chris Martin, some of the great New Zealanders, have the other stuff that has set the mood in election time is we've had a bunch of selections happening, Labour and National both having selections. Some of the Labour ones are a bit more, I suppose, interesting at this point because Sophie Hanford was selected in Kapiti in one of the new seats. She was involved in the climate strikes early on. And it's interesting because one might have thought she was a more natural fit for the Greens, but it perhaps is, I don't know how telling that is, that Labour have got her standing for them. Aisha Varal has got Wellington North, which is a made-up name I don't like, but not as made-up and unacceptable to me as Wellington Bays, which is not a thing. You can't call electorate Wellington Bays.
If you look at the map, there are a lot of bays.
Yeah, but no one calls it Wellington Bays, Ben. You can't call it Wellington Bays. It's just not right. It's not appropriate. You should call it by its correct geographical name, which is Peter Jackson Villas. That's the appropriate name for that part of Wellington. Craig Rennie has won the Labour selection for that. The former CTU economist used to be a brain in a jar in Grant Robertson's office, but when he was...
he's still the CTU economist.
Still the CTU economist. Yeah, current CTU economist, and hoping to become a Labour MP, and who knows what he might rise to thereafter. Greg O'Connor maybe gets squeezed out in that, which is a bit sad for Greg O'Connor and his another piece you need to read, him at the Newlands pub in his little locals corner on the Spinoff. Other things.
The guy up north standing against Shane Reti.
Oh, yeah. Gary
Payinda.
Yeah, doctor.
He looks interesting.
A doctor. And, so that all gets things going. But, of course, the thing that more than anything else signals that it's election time is Winston Peters announcing it's election time, essentially, or ringing all the bells. There have been various, in a way, both he and David Seymour have been running the permanent campaign, more than ever, and tried to find a way, and has been working, and I'm sure that we could argue about there being more contributing factors to that. But what shifted this week was, among other things, where Winston Peters announced that he would campaign, that New Zealand First would campaign in the election against the Regulatory Standards Bill. Now, it's not unusual. It's not unusual for Winston Peters and New Zealand First to face criticisms or questions around campaigning against some policy that back in one government or another that they were in, that they voted for. In this case, it was something they voted for like half an hour earlier.
And literally, Casey Costello made it sound so good when she voted
was
for
really
it.
compelling.
She sold it.
Wow.
I'm like, what? You don't want to get rid of it, surely.
This sounds awesome.
Yeah. I'll have five.
Well, as Casey Costello herself said when asked about the carousel of members' bills, look, it just depends on what's in the news at the time.
Okay. Well, there you go. There it is, the permanent campaign. Annabelle, are you feeling the excitement? It's like Christmas, but it is Christmas, but it's election time. Like we're away.
We're all the way on. I mean, it's no surprise, this was always going to happen when Winston took the second term, the first term of the prime ministership, and then as soon as David Seymour got it, he said that that's exactly what he's going to be doing. So, I mean, am I excited? To be perfectly honest, no, I'm exhausted because it's like, oh God, we're starting this early, are we? Okay, yeah, here we go.
Your
seatbelts on, whānau.
Ben's excited.
Yeah, let's bring it all back. It's time limited. Everything resets in October or November next year. Bring it all back. Treaty Principles Bill, Regulatory Standards Bill, RMA reform.
Yeah.
Let's put it all back on the table. Let's have another 12 weeks talking about it after the negotiations. Oh my God, I can't even, I feel so panicked and distressed thinking about next year.
Just for this reason alone, it's worth having the 4-year terms, just to save us the stress.
Yes. Just to put off for one more year Sora-generated videos of Shane Jones riding a bear in Northland.
If they were like, Attila the Hun, you're going to have 4 years, but Attila the Hun's going to get the first 4, I'll be like, oh, it's worth it. Like, I'm okay with it.
I think we even started a little earlier. I think when Winston Peters appeared on, was it Morning Report, saying that these guys don't know how to run the economy, talking about the government he was part of.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's like those cognitive psychology experiments, those accidental experiments they have where the two hemispheres of someone's brain become severed in an accident, and then they just conduct experiments on the left and right side at the same time. And that's what this government is now. It's like, like, I mean, just the oh my God, jeez.
I think we're going to need to get some medical attention to Ben Thomas.
He needs a Lucozade. He needs a Lucozade.
Mountain Dew.
What's happening here is that obviously the polling for the coalition as a whole has gone down since the election, but not that much, and not as much as you would expect from, the way that it's talked about. In the majority of polls that are taken, they still form a government ahead of any other combination. There's always a chance that Winston Peters could find it in his heart to forgive Chris Hipkins and sacrifice himself for the good of the country and do 3 years as Deputy Prime Minister to stop Te Pāti Māori being needed to form a government, something along those lines. But I think it's tolerably clear that Peters would prefer to stay in this coalition. I think it works very well for him. I don't think he enjoyed his time in Labour. If you read even Grant Robertson's book, the contempt in which they held Peters is so palpable, and I don't think it's something you could really disguise on a day-to-day basis. And my understanding is that it didn't feel very disguised to the New Zealand First people. And so, at this point, if you're in the coalition, you would think, well, we are going to be returned. So now it's just an argument, it's just an argument about where the votes fall in there. New Zealand First would be looking at the concessions they got with 6 point something of the vote in 2023 and thinking, well, what if it's 10%? ACT might be thinking, what could we get for 10%? National will be thinking, is the ship of Theseus, is it still the ship of Theseus if the hull has fallen off and if the sail is in the harbour? And so there is a lot of that sort of intra-coalition jockeying. One of the things, there was that terrible polling for National that came out in the Ipsos Issues Monitor showing that they were underwater on confidence to manage the economy. The coalition government had the worst rating out of 10 on average from voters since that survey began, which albeit that's only 10 or 11 years, but still, pretty poor. But at the same time, if you were looking at those sort of figures, you would think, well, this coalition must be on the track to defeat. But it's not. It's just that a lot of the voters, and I've had this confirmed by parties from their internal polling and their analysis of it, that what they're really seeing is that a lot of the people who are expressing dissatisfaction with the government or with economic management, it's because they say, well, it should be more ACT. It should be more like David Seymour wants, not like Christopher Luxon wants. It should be more like Winston Peters wants, not what Christopher Luxon wants. And so...
Do you think that's true, though, Ben, given how low David Seymour polled in that, was it a mood of the boardroom where they ranked the performance of the ministers?
Yeah, but the mood, look, David Seymour is widely disliked. He has very poor net approval. but he's a minor party, right? So I think ACT's still tracking a little above, on average, their election night result. They were tracking well above it. New Zealand First are far above their election night result. And so what's happening is that you're not actually seeing this huge flight of voters from National over to Labour. You're seeing people go from National and getting kind of stuck in the storm grate of New Zealand First. They're still broadly in favour of a centre-right coalition government with New Zealand First in it. There's just concerns about the National Party leadership and that kind of overall tenor. But that's every reason for these voters to vote for Winston Peters, David Seymour, to strengthen their hand in the post-election negotiations. So I think you're going to see much, much more of this, distinguishing from each other on issues, and a lot more sort of basically infighting that will be varying levels from playful to outright hostile.
Yeah. The good thing is that National has nothing to worry about now, because Sir Bill English has said that Christopher Luxon is going to be the next Prime Minister.
Oh,
he's good at winning elections, so we can take his word for it.
I mean, it is always such a trick. It's like that. What's that machine that they made for interest rates? The Moniac machine, is that what it was called? The
water and the valves,
and you adjust with all the coalition different pieces and how that affects other parts of it. Maybe it's more like the bucket fountain. I don't know, but if you say, Ben, that to the electorate at large, that New Zealand First and ACT in a government post-2026 are going to have more leverage, I'm not sure that that's going to go down terribly well. But the people who lose out from that might be National, almost paradoxically.
Yes, yeah.
Which brings us inexorably to the other story of the week, which is the talk. And as far as I'm aware, it is very much at a talk level. I'm not sure that anyone is on manoeuvres relating to Christopher Luxon's grip on the leadership of the National Party and thereby the Prime Ministership. The Ipsos survey, which you mentioned, was definitely part of those conversations when National was seen as not doing that well. I imagine that Christopher Luxon, when he was listening, as I'm sure he does, quite dutifully to Juggernaut Season 2, took some solace from hearing that Jim Bolger went down as low as 6% in the preferred Prime Minister rankings. At one point, there was an opposition MP attempted a stunt whereby they wanted to get him listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the lowest ever sitting preferred Prime Minister rating. Fortunately for Bolger, someone at RNZ found a lower rating for a former Japanese Prime Minister. Anyway, Luxon's still 20, which is, from that point of view, is not terrible. But definitely these things do sometimes have not necessarily a self-fulfilling prophecy, but they do build a momentum of their own. And we had over the weekend, on the eye line on the masthead on the Post newspaper in Wellington, which is also obviously quite a big conversation setter in that capital city. The nugget read, "All eyes on Luxon, speculation swirling in Wellington." Heather Duplessis-Allen on News Talk ZB has been talking a lot about how this is real talk. She's not suggesting that it's necessarily going to happen, but it's a very real thing, and sort of, guffawing at Paul Goldsmith for suggesting he hasn't heard anything, which is, of course, what they have to say. It's one of those areas where, it would be a gaffe to tell the truth, which is, yes, of course, people talk about it from time to time. Thomas Coughlin had a headline on his piece that it was the week the national coup talk went into overdrive. There's stuff in action. Annabelle, I would have thought this close to Christmas it can't happen now. It's clearly not ready enough. Chris Bishop, who is the person being talked about as the likeliest contender or rival, is deep in RMA and other exciting local government reforms. He's also the campaign manager. There are other the countdown clock is on towards Christmas. There's also, of course, barbecue season to come. Crucially, Mike Hosking is going on holiday at the end of next week, and he is, as I've argued before, the true Grim Reaper for Christopher Luxon. When the end comes, it will be Hosking who decides it. There was another little newsline, which again I think is one of those things that is fueled by the existing energy around it. When Christopher Luxon asked a question about whether or not he had concerns about the national list candidates who could miss out on their seats as a result of polling, and he said no. And that was kind of not concerned. Luxon's not concerned. He had to issue a clarification. It's kind of a beat up, but the fact that it became a thing sort of tells you, Annabelle, about where we are, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And again, still his lack of skill with dealing with the media, because of course that's what they were going to pump it up into, even if that wasn't the intention, because of what's swirling around. I mean, never say never, Tobe, in terms of, it won't happen before Christmas. I think Heather Duplessis-Allen raises some interesting points that if it was to happen before Christmas, it would make it somewhat more palatable, and that, then everyone would get to go on holiday and kind of let it all die down and kick back into it. And I mean, if the last couple of years have shown us anything, it's that New Zealand politics is now completely unpredictable. So might it happen before Christmas? Possibly. Will it happen before the election? I feel 90% certain that it probably will. I mean, this guy has had these rumours swirling around him now for more than a year. When did it first kick off?
You think you're confident it will happen in some form at some point before the election?
I think it will happen before the election, yeah. I've said this a number of times. I just don't think that that 2 years in he's been able to pull out of the kind of plummeting popularity perception around him, and that more and more people are going to become. I've said this so many times, I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but as more and more people see themselves drop off the list, people become more and more motivated to do something about it. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude or disrespectful, but he's clearly a lame duck Prime Minister. And I think that, if you're a first-term government, you are very motivated to stick around for longer. If you're a second-term government or a third-term government, you might be like, well, we've had a good crack at it, and, we want to go out with our dignity and our mana. But being a first-term government, to be in such a dire position, I feel like you're probably more motivated to look at, what other options are available. In my view, what do I know? I live in Auckland.
Ben, one of the things that has been said about Chris Luxon again ad infinitum is that he did not come into. He doesn't have political experience, so he has not been in there in the fire. He's not learnt all the tricks. He's not nimble on his feet. He has a CEO background. I think one of the disappointments for those who backed him is that there is no particular sense that he has got a lot better in terms of the kind of, I guess, antennae in the moment, and when you compare him to someone like Bishop, who is just so good at answering a question in the moment, whether or not that's the same thing as being a good Prime Minister, I don't know.
I think too, people would have forgiven his lack of skill with media and all of that if he had been able to deliver in terms of, a better performing economy, getting a grip on cost of living, all of those things. But in the absence of that and the absence of a development of skill, people are being less forgiving.
But that gets to the nub of it, doesn't it? Like, essentially, we can talk all we like, people can rumour mill all they like, the scuttlebutt can ride its way around the streets of Wellington. In the end, what matters is whether or not the economy shows visible and meaningful signs of improving. And once that line starts getting better, once people start feeling better, once people feel as though, and there are all these little data points that I've seen people mention, like people now have the lower interest rates on a mortgage, providing more disposable income as you go into Christmas or whatever. Those things make people feel a bit better, make people feel they can afford to get a better Airbnb for that week in the end of January. They can afford to get a lawnmower that they'd had their eyes on, whatever. Ben, in the end, all of those things, those concerns about his leadership start to fall away, don't they, once the economy leads everything else?
That's definitely been the strategy. And that was very clearly the sort of motivation between the year of growth. Laser-like focused this year on economic growth because half of that was a punt of, dedicating attention to the areas that will, make the most difference and, trying not to focus on minutiae. And look, there certainly have been some big reforms that are going through. The RMA is a big one as well that will be introduced by the end of the year. The RMA reform, on the other hand, it's what did Grant Robertson say about the economy after COVID? It's not like flipping a light switch. It's more like heating an oven. And when you're talking about the psychological impact on people feeling better about their lives, the government is really running out of runway before the election. A pickup in economic activity in the third quarter of 2026 is going to be too late. Now, the likelihood is that we're already seeing it start to turn around, but at the same time, remember, there's a 0.9% contraction in the second quarter of this year. There's still, and in terms of cost of living, which has become really surged again as an area of concern after it looked to be kind of dipping in importance while still being by far the number one issue, but sort of, being a little less acute. That's really come back to the fore. Now, prices haven't increased that much, except, rates have gone up, obviously, electricity's gone up, insurance went up last year. But by and large, the thing is, prices are still at a level that is much higher than they were before inflation took off. That's just the nature of inflation, unless we get deflation, which we're not going to. And I don't, people still haven't psychologically adjusted. I haven't adjusted. Whenever I see what, 6 items cost when I go for a shop, I'm like, well,
Unbelievable,
that can't be.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they haven't gone up recently. I just haven't, I'm still just in a mindset where a pie costs $1.50 and, whatever. And that kind of structural adjustment, which I think Bill English talked about, that's people don't deal with that in their rational brains. So if everyone has got more money in their pockets from lower interest rates, now remember only a third of the country actually have mortgages, and get a promotion at their job or a pay rise, then they might then they'll be starting to feel better as they come in. Otherwise, maybe it's tougher. And so, you could have this thing where, the economic indicators are turning around. The Stats NZ reports are looking better, but that takes a while to filter through to people in their own lives. So they are running out of runway to rely on that. And that was a gamble that they made. It seemed like a reasonable gamble at the time. All of the forecasts were that, things were looking up, things are coming back. It's been a very, very, very stubborn recession, or recessionary environment. In a sense, it's just bad luck for them that happened. But you got to deal with it. In terms of whether they roll Luxon, ultimately that comes down to whether somebody decides to trigger a challenge. My sense would be that if a challenge is triggered, Luxon's in a very vulnerable position. I don't think he's got a significant kind of personal faction of his own. He was sort of a kind of compromise default candidate, which is when he became leader, not in a bad way. I think he was the overwhelming choice to become the leader because he really suited that leadership role, and he did a very good job of uniting the party in opposition. Excellent job. They did come into government as a cohesive unit. He's he is not Jacinda Ardern, John Key, or even Bill English level sort of charismatic politician. And he doesn't have that sort of breadth of experience to be able to just sort of chat off the cuff about things. There is that authenticity problem, that he comes across a bit like an HR coach or a marketing guy. And And there are some real challenges. His leadership is a real drag on them in government. And again, part of that is not his fault. It's this reliance on the three-way coalition. You'll hear this line, reported secondhand by columnists saying, well, Luxon's not great at the media, but he's behind the scenes, he's great at managing the coalition. Now that's essentially shorthand for Luxon is prepared to eat a lot of shit from his coalition partners
and they've
in a
done
way
him
that doesn't.
Yeah, and they've done him no favours either, eh? Like they haven't tried to maintain his mana.
No, absolutely not. And first of all, I don't think that's trivial, right? I think that being able to take that and, as far as you can tell from Luxon, be pretty psychically unaffected by it, probably is a useful skill in this sort of management environment, coalition management environment. But what it hasn't helped is National keeping its share of the vote. And so, I think, because all people in Wellington talk about is politics, you can go through a sort of 100-point sort of matrix on every sort of individual facet of does a challenge make sense, and you don't really get a clear answer because you just don't know how things will react. I think realistically, the only thing that would sort of trigger a direct challenge, I think, is if you see sustained periods under 30, in the
For the party.
or if there's for National, or if there's a scandal, that somehow involves Luxon, which seems unlikely.
Well, would it need to be a scandal, or would it need to just be another Andrew Bailey Hosking interview thing? Like, I do think that there was that. There was the apartment thing, was obviously severe, but like something like that, which really teases out the vulnerability that you have with somebody like with that leader.
Well, that's right. And so I think, and this is related to his coalition management, one of the things I think that sort of ironically does protect Luxon from some sort of challenge right now is that in most previous governments, if there were, prospective challenges being named in the media, or at least speculative challenges being named in the media, this would normally result in a bit of sort of, a visit from the chief of staff, or, a bit of, and you saw both Simon Bridges and Judith Collins essentially sort of pulled the trigger on their own leaderships by sort of making preemptive sort of attacks, first of all on Muller and then Bridges in the case of Collins. And Luxon won't. He's like this sort of Stepford wife, or 50s housewife who just sort of smiles, while there's a cut. She's cut herself on a knife in the kitchen, and she's just like, "Oh, everything fine." Her husband's like, "I'm going to leave you," and she's like, "Didn't catch that, dear. Are we still on for tomorrow night with the Smiths around?" And I thought that was the interesting part of Tova's question about, what are you concerned for the National MPs who might lose their jobs? Pretty clear what he meant, I think, from that. But trying to kind of provoke him to move beyond that sort of like, oh, what? Chris Bishop, my best friend, Chris Bishop, into, some kind of recognition of, the challenging circumstance he's in. And to his credit, he's just not buying it. He's just totally,
the point about that line, that his answer to that question, which I don't personally think was a big deal, but it wasn't at all to do with anyone who seriously thought he was indifferent to the plight of MPs. That would not be a thing that he would say, but more to do with his level of adroitness, his level of nimbleness, his agility to be able to, in the moment, reset the thing. Shiloh's up and walking around, so we should probably move on quickly. The only other thing I really want to quickly mention in a moment of self-promotion, because it does relate back to Juggernaut and something I wrote recently, which is the big difference between rolling a leader in opposition. One of the big differences between rolling a leader in opposition, when you talk about Bridges or Collins, and in government, of course, is that you have those coalition partners. And in a paradoxical sense, the weakness of Luxon might be a strength, because you talk about Winston Peters, David Seymour, it suits them quite well, doesn't it, to have someone who manages them in a way that is reasonably comfortable. They're allowed to air their views quite, and above everything else, they're polling very very healthily. They're not in what is typical of so many support party situations leading into an election year, which is really, really struggling to hit that 5% threshold. So, as we know from 1997, Winston Peters, the last time a sitting Prime Minister was actively rolled, Winston Peters did not respond well at all to the idea that he was about to be landed with a new Prime Minister. He felt he had not been consulted. I think he felt he had been disrespected. I think it's fair to say. Winston Peters puts a lot of store by the idea of respect, and I think he felt he'd been disrespected. And so that was kind of over before it began in one sense. And then, of course, a year later, he was removed from cabinet after storming out, and the rest is history, of course. So it's just complex. The layers of complexity once you start thinking about these things. What we don't know is, once again, to hark back to those times, because I'm a stuck record and I apologise for that, is whether or not there is a Te Pūki bypass committee underway. We don't know whether there is an actual kind of system that's been set up and that does have a plan, whether or not it engages or not, whether there is a plan. So anyway, the only final thing I'll say...
Call us and let us know.
Call us and let us know. We're happy to keep it within the confines of the podcast and its listeners. The last thing I'd say is that New Zealand is proud of its place in the world. Mentioned the Guinness Book of Records earlier and that opportunity to make a splash in international media. There is a scenario, I think, that has come to mind with Chris Bishop being mentioned as a potential successor to Luxon, that if there were a one-term government, which is unusual, but then maybe that sets the tone for another one-term government, we could make history in New Zealand by having a Prime Minister called Chris, replaced by a Prime Minister called Chris, that's where we are now, replaced by a Prime Minister called Chris, who in turn is replaced by a Prime Minister called Chris.
That would be so... Can we do that?
I mean, that would be a
Please,
first. I don't think no one else can claim
else.
that. So that's
only us.
Before we go, Annabelle, we talked about Te Pāti Māori a fair bit in this podcast recently, but a really fascinating, compelling interview released by Mata yesterday, available on YouTube RNZ, which you produce, in which Mihi Forbes interviewed Tākuta Ferris, who, of course, is Te Tonga MP, who attracted controversy which at the time when he in the Tamaki Makaurau by-election, an Instagram post created controversy, which we thought was something, but turns out to be the smallest thing that got overtaken by a much bigger controversy. Some pretty extraordinary revelations in that, I thought. One of the first times we're actually getting a sense of actually trying to understand what was going on behind the scenes. He describes in some detail that reset day when we saw, that was Oreni Kaipara's maiden speech. That was the reset press conference. On that same day, there'd been a 3-hour-long hui, I think, which originally...
And Oreni's maiden speech as well.
Which originally Tākuta Ferris had wanted to have as a 6 MPs only hui, and that got turned into a much bigger thing. But also some quite astonishing claims relating to the way that Takutai Taj Kemp, whose death prompted that by-election, was treated in the final weeks of her life. You, of course, went to John Tamihere, the president, who is the subject of many of these claims, for response. He declined a response, saying it was hearsay or something. It's a fascinating.
Were you in the future, though.
Yeah, totally. It'd be good to hear his version, of course. But that as you were sitting watching that play out, what was going through your mind?
It's been interesting because all through this sort of civil war between Te Pāti Māori, it felt like the things that were being talked about, they were problems and issues, but not necessarily the crux of the issue. And I felt like in that interview with Tākuta, it felt like we were getting, like more under the hood of the interpersonal tensions between the MPs that kind of created the environment for it to all explode. The other interesting thing, so it's a fascinating interview. I encourage you to all watch it. The other interesting thing that happened in the weekend was the the hui and Te Tai Tokero went ahead, which was attended by Maria Mino and Tākuta and Orini, I understand, and I guess what you would call no reps from the other side in this sort of inter-party fight turned up. And I thought it was interesting because to me it kind of sets an interesting precedent in that, you know, when you look at a lot of legislation that Te Pāti Māori has been opposing, like regulatory standards and treaty principles and all of that stuff, you know, a big part of that legislation is that you consult with Māori, you meet with Māori, you engage with Māori. And so for Te Pāti Māori to not attend that hui, I thought, you know, you're then asking the Crown to do something that you as a Māori party are not prepared to do. I mean, even David Seymour, as controversial as treaty principles was, you know, he still took the time to go to Waitangi, te mura o te ahi, with his MPs, and he fronted up there, you know, they spoke all of that. So I thought it, you know, creates a kind of an awkward situation for Te Pāti Māori that they didn't attend that hui, because you know, if Māori or if them as a Māori party expect other people to front up and face Māori on difficult issues, they need to be able to do it as well, and that didn't happen. So it's an interesting one. Still looks like there's still a bit of water to flow under the bridge before this one gets resolved.
Yeah, an ocean maybe to need to go. Last word from you, Ben.
Well, you mentioned, you know, the RMA replacement will be introduced before the end of the year. You know, the indications from the cabinet directions, you know, in terms of getting rid of the general treaty clause from that legislation. So there'll be a lot of interest in, you know, what replaces that. You know, we've already seen the amendments to the Marine and Coastal Area Act that have all happened while Te Pāti Māori has just been running this ludicrous, inscrutable soap opera. And I think if they have any sense of the greater good for their constituents, they will just at least decide to park this and work it out later, because it's just self-indulgent nonsense.
Thanks so much for your company. We will return with another podcast on the subject of politics anytime now. Thanks, it's been fun. Kia ora.